On January 11th, 2013, at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia, a few students were walking through the gym when they noticed something odd over toward the corner in an old wrestling mat. Curious, they walked over to check it out. But when they got there, what they saw would leave them in horror and lead to national headlines and unending controversy. Welcome back to Legends May Live. I'm Drew, and today we're stepping inside one of the most controversial cases in modern history. On January 10th, 2013, 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson woke up, got dressed, and grabbed his backpack. He said goodbye to his mom as he headed out the door to hop on the bus for school. The bus was nice. It gave a little extra time to wake up, laugh, and just relax for a bit before school and sports practices. Kendrick was a natural athlete. He played football, basketball, and even ran track and field. After arriving to school, it was a pretty typical day for the most part. He went to class, joked around with friends, and then around 1:30 he headed to the gym before his fourth block weight training class. Later that evening, Jacqueline, Kendrick's mother, was preparing dinner and getting the house ready for a quiet and peaceful evening. She looked at the clock, and as usual, Kendrick was running late. She just smiled and shook her head as she continued on. Kendrick often stayed late after school to practice one sport or another. He was working toward his dream of becoming a professional football player. And standing at a height of 6 foot already, and with his determination, it was almost certain to become a reality. When dinner time came and passed, though, Jacqueline and Kendrick's father, Kenneth, they were getting worried. It wasn't like him to miss dinner, especially not without a call. So they asked around, but no one knew where Kendrick was. Another hour rolled by, and this was just getting to be too much. Jacqueline had had enough, and it was time to call the police. So she picked up the phone, dialed the police station, and reported her son missing. But the police were just completely unconcerned. He was a 17-year-old who had been missing for just a few hours. They told the Johnson family that he was probably just out with some girl and not to worry about it. This was obviously not the response that Jacqueline was looking for, so first thing in the morning she went to school to let them know that Kendrick was missing. The school administrators were immediately more concerned than the police. They printed out missing persons flyers, and they were very sympathetic to Mrs. Johnson, but aside from that, they really couldn't provide a whole lot of help. So Jacqueline goes straight to work, asking questions, putting up flyers, driving around, and making calls. Meanwhile, back at the school, a group of students are walking through the gym, just going to their next class, but when they pass the rolled-up mats used for wrestling practice, one of them notices something odd. So they all walk over to check it out, and they kind of just poke around and peer down the tube because they think they know what they're seeing, but they're trying to figure out why it's there. Then, when they catch a better look at what's inside the mat, absolute shock and terror floods over them all as one screams and turns to run. School staff arrive as quick as they can, and when they see what the students found, police are called immediately. Because inside of that rolled-up mat was a deceased Kendrick Johnson. Kendrick's body was found upside down in the rolled-up mat. There's one shoe beneath his head, and the other is a few feet away on the floor. There's some blood near his face, but not much. It's a small bit pooled on the floor below with a smear on the mat. His features are bloated and discolored, almost unrecognizable, the kind of swelling seen in cases of suffocation or prolonged pressure. But some say it looked more like blunt force trauma. His upper body was disfigured, with reports describing it as distorted and uneven, as if something had impacted his neck or jawline. They say he must have gotten stuck while reaching for the shoe. Now, it was pretty common for guys to keep their belongings in that area and come back for them between classes, but how does a healthy 17-year-old athlete get stuck in a mat that he could have just tipped over? Within days, investigators make a public statement. Kendrick's death was ruled accidental. The cause? Positional asphyxia. There were no visible external wounds, no gashes, no bruises, the initial coroner noted, just swelling. They claimed Kendrick dropped the shoe inside the mat and tried to retrieve it head first and became trapped. Unable to breathe, he suffocated. Case closed. But to the Johnson family, and to many more, this didn't make sense. Kendrick was over 6 feet tall, with relatively broad shoulders. The opening of the mat he would have had to have voluntarily squeezed into, all the while without accidentally knocking it over, was just 14 inches wide. And if he was reaching for a shoe, why was one a few feet away and the other under his head? But even if it was just a kid trying to fit somewhere he didn't fit, that's not the strangest part. After intense public pressure, security footage from the gym is released, and it just makes things even stranger. Large chunks of time are missing. The cameras seem to glitch, and angles where Kendrick should appear are blank. If all we had to go off of were the parts of the security camera footage that hadn't glitched, then it would seem like Kendrick must have just teleported into that mat upside down. In June of 2013, 5 months after his death, Kendrick's parents order his body to be exhumed. They want a second opinion, and what they find is horrifying. Kendrick's internal organs, all of them, are missing. His heart, brain, lungs, liver, everything is gone, and in their place was just a bunch of wadded up newspaper. Now, it's actually quite common for the organs to be removed during an autopsy and then placed back in the body or preserved separately in a sealed bag. And if they can't be returned for some reason, like decomposition, the coroner or medical examiner would document this, and the funeral home should use the standard filler like cotton or sawdust to maintain body shape for embalming. But the funeral home claimed that what they did was standard practice because the organs were too decomposed, but newspaper hadn't been used in decades as standard practice. But forgetting that, saying that maybe the funeral home is just way behind the times, what's actually concerning is that the coroner says he never received them from the original autopsy. And there's no chain of custody to show who had them or what was done with them. But supposing all of this was just one accident or oversight after the other, what's really the worst part was that the second autopsy directly contradicted the first. This time, it showed that it wasn't asphyxiation that killed the teenager. The cause of death is ruled blunt force trauma to the neck. And that meant that this was likely no accident. As public outrage grows, so do the theories. 2 brothers, both sons of a local FBI agent, are named in a wrongful death suit. They were allegedly involved in past altercations with Kendrick. But the case falls apart. The accused have airtight alibis. No physical evidence links them to Kendrick's death, and the suit's dismissed. Still, the family continues fighting. They believe someone tampered with the evidence. Then someone deleted surveillance footage. That someone with influence helped cover it up. In 2016, the Department of Justice closes the investigation. They found no sufficient evidence to bring charges. But even so, they still admit that the case was very unusual. Then in March of 2021, the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office reopened the investigation. The decision was partly due to the Johnson family's refusal to give up on finding justice for Kendrick, along with the emergence of potential new evidence, including an audio recording suggesting a confession. Sheriff Ashley Polk, who was not in the office at the time of the original investigation, also received 17 boxes of previously sealed evidence from the Department of Justice. But in spite of all this, Sheriff Polk concluded that there was no evidence of foul play, reaffirming the original ruling. The case was closed again in January of 2022. Over 10 years have passed, but the questions haven't faded. Why were Kendrick's organs missing? Why was so much security footage lost or corrupted? Why was no foul play ever officially acknowledged? And why did the first autopsy miss the neck trauma? The Johnson family believes that their son was killed and that the truth was buried. And in a case filled with gaps, contradictions, and vanished evidence, you have to ask, was Kendrick Johnson the victim of a terrible accident? Or did someone make sure his voice was never heard again? This has been Legends May Live. I'm Drew, and stories like this, they don't just haunt families, they haunt entire communities. If you know anything or have any information that might help bring closure, or if you would like to support the family, you can reach out to the Kendrick Johnson Foundation. Until next time, stay safe.